Good evening, everyone, and welcome. Thanks for tuning in this evening for our online Bible study. Let's get into it. I welcome you if you are new to this study. I'm Pastor Dave St. Aubin. It's a joy to be with you here this evening. Tonight, we will be looking at the Gospel of Matthew, chapter 14. So I invite you to grab your Bibles, open them up to Matthew 14, grab something to take some good notes with, grab a beverage, and grab a snack, and let's get into it. Well, again, good evening and welcome, and thanks for tuning in. I do pray that your day's been going well. Pray that you had a good weekend. Happy Monday, happy first day of June. Good to be with you here this evening as we continue our journey through the Bible one chapter at a time. And we began this study way back in September 12th of 2022. And now here we are in the beginning of June 2026, and we've made it all the way into the New Testament, into the Gospel of Matthew. Tonight we will be looking at chapter 14. So whether this is your first time with us, or maybe you've been with us from the very beginning of the study, or maybe you joined somewhere in between, we have folks from all over the country, 14 different states represented in our virtual classroom. And it's just a joy to be with you here and to go through this study like this, one chapter at a time. It's been quite a journey for me. And I pray for you as well, whether new to the study or again since the beginning, wherever you may have joined in, welcome. Matthew chapter 14. So now we're at the halfway point of this gospel. And where we've been up to this point, Jesus has been teaching. He's been teaching the masses. He's been teaching his disciples. The rejection, his opposition has been mounting. He was firmly rejected, accused by the Pharisees of his healing power, his miracles coming from not the Holy Spirit, but from the spirit of Satan. And because of that, Jesus' teachings were no longer about the imminent coming of the kingdom of God. Now he's going to teach in parables, not to confuse the masses of people, but to get them to think a little differently. For the disciples, what we saw last Friday in chapter 13 is they would have understood what these parables meant, at least to a point. Jesus explained them to them, so they would have had an understanding through that. But now we're going to make this journey towards the cross, really. And tonight, interesting chapter 14, lists a few different things. What we're going to see first is the opposition of Herod, and we're going to hear about the beheading of John the Baptist. And then we're going to look at two more very important miracles that Jesus performed. One, the feeding of the 5,000, and then his walking on water. And then to wrap the chapter up, we come to this very short section about God's glory. So there is a lot in here. We have a lot to look at. We're going to go through this whole chapter tonight. And so get settled in. Open up your Bibles to Matthew chapter 14. If you don't have a Bible with you, not a problem. As always, all the verses are right there on the screen for you so you can follow along. Take some really good notes tonight. And let's start with verse 1. And we're going to see this opposition from Herod. So at that time is, again, this is a loose connective word. It's not necessarily intended to communicate chronological sequence happening one after the other. It's possible, but this is just a connective word. So at that time, Herod the Tetrarch, and we'll talk about that, had heard of the reports about Jesus, and so he said to his attendants, this man Jesus, this isn't him. This is John the Baptist. He's risen from the dead. This is why his miraculous powers are at work in him. So Herod Antipas, or Herod the Tetrarch meaning ruler of a fourth, right? Tetra is for meaning four. So Herod lived primarily at Tiberias on the Sea of Galilee. That would have been on the west shore of the Sea of Galilee. Still an area today, beautiful area, Tiberias. But if all the events of what was taking place happened in one day, and we use this word at that time, so it's possible, it's really probable that all these events happened on one day, then this wouldn't have happened at Tiberias. This would have taken place at Herod's fortress, his residence near Perea, closer to the Dead Sea area. So not near Galilee, but farther south in the Dead Sea area. So Antipas, he ruled over the Galilee and Perea from about 4 BC to almost 40 AD. So pretty much nearly all of Jesus' earthly life, he was the ruler. This word about Jesus' ministry had reached Herod, and we'll see more of that when we get to Luke's gospel. Now, Herod had beheaded John the Baptist, and we're going to see this here in a moment in verse 3. Why did he behead John the Baptist? Because John the Baptist had criticized Herod's morality, and we're going to see this again in a moment, verses 3 through 12 of this chapter. So Herod beheads John. Now, how does he have authority to do this? Because John was ministering within the jurisdiction of Herod, which was the Galilee and Perea. What really encouraged Herod to conclude that Jesus was John the Baptist come back to life was popular opinion. He was not coerced by people, but heavily influenced by how people thought about who Jesus was at this time. So whereas the Pharisees attribute Jesus' miracles to Satan, Herod attributes Jesus' miracles to being the resurrected John the Baptist. So let's look at this encounter of Herod with John the Baptist. Verse 3. So Herod had arrested John, bound him up, and put him in prison. Why? Because of Herodias. Who is Herodias? She was the wife of Herod's brother Philip. Now, the gospel writers, Matthew, Mark, and Luke, they ascribe moral and religious motives to Herod as being the reason for executing John. The Jewish historian Josephus wrote that Herod beheaded John for political reasons. The gospel writers attribute it to moral, religious reasons. Josephus attributes it to political reasons. Most likely it was all of this that led to Herod to act as he did. So Herod Antipas, Herod the Tetrarch, had two brothers. Both of these brothers were named Philip. The one that is being referred to here in Matthew's gospel was Philip the first. The other brother appropriately named Philip the second. So Philip the first is Herod's half-brother. Philip, is married to Herodias. So there is some bloodline here between all these people. And by Antipas having this affair with Philip's wife, which would have been Herod's sister-in-law or half-sister-in-law, was not only adulterous, it was immoral, right? So verse 4, John had been saying to Herod, this is not right. This is not lawful for you to do this. So Herod is having this affair with his half-brother's wife. John is telling Herod that this is an immoral, unreligious activity that you are taking part in. You should not be doing this. And Herodias, aside from being Philip's wife and Herod's half-sister-in-law was also Herod's niece. So now this is a incestuous relationship. For John, that would not have been the problem, that this was Herod's niece, because the law did not forbid uncles from marrying their nieces. Where John had the problem is that Herod is having this adulterous affair with his sister-in-law, his brother's wife. Herod didn't like that. Verse 5, so he wants to kill John. Why? Because John's challenging him. But he was afraid of the people, because the people considered John the Baptist to be a prophet, the first prophet, really, in several hundred years. After Malachi in the Old Testament, there were no prophets up to John the Baptist. So here's the issue going on. Verse 6, now on Herod's birthday. Now, birthdays were celebrated in this time, not like we think of them today. The wealthy, the powerful celebrated birthdays because it was a big festival. You had food, you had drink. Most of that was in short supply. The commoner couldn't afford all that. So most people would only feast during the festivals or during weddings. The only people that really celebrated birthdays were the wealthy. So Herod, on his birthday, the daughter of Herodias. Now, who's the daughter of Herodias? Because now we're going to see this situation really start to blossom out. So the daughter of Herodias was Salome. This daughter came from a marriage previous to Herodias being married to Philip I. So on Herod's birthday, the daughter of Herodias, who would have been between 12 and 14 years old, Salome, danced for the guests. And that dancing pleased Herod so much, verse 7, that he promised with an oath, which he should not have done, and we'll talk about this, to give her, Salome, whatever she wanted. Prompted by her mother, Herodias, Salome said, give me the head of John the Baptist on a platter. So this idea that Salome's dance was a sensuous dance, that's probably true. We really don't see that in the text here. But the reputation of Herod and his wife Herodias and her daughter Salome, and they had very low standards, very low morals. So to have a young girl dancing in front of Herod, though immoral and unlawful, would not have been unheard of, at least for Herod. Herod's acting like a king of Persia, right? He's monarch of this area, but he's acting like the pagans. He's a Jew, but he's acting like the pagan kings who would partake in this kind of activity. So here's the situation. Herod, married to Herodias, her daughter from a previous marriage, Salome, on Herod's birthday, dances before him and his guests, and he gets so worked up by this that he says, I'll give you whatever you want. Herodias says, ask him for Herod's head on a platter. So now the king, Herod, is distressed. Verse 9. Why? Because he's afraid of the people. He doesn't. The people consider John to be a prophet. But because he just made an oath, right? And because of his dinner guests that were there, he's wanting to save face. He orders that her request be granted. And he had John beheaded while he was in prison. This oath Antipas gave was wrong. And it's not an oath that he just said once. In verse 7, verse 9, we'll see he gave this oath more than once. He's wrong to give it. He's wrong to keep it. But he's wanting to save face in front of his dinner guests, right? I can't go back on my word now. I've just given it. Now, decapitation, beheading. This was a Roman practice. The Jews didn't partake in this type of punishment. This was a Roman activity, much like crucifixion. The Jewish law required trial before executing prisoners. The Romans didn't. Herod is playing into the Roman hand here. Just, she wants him beheaded, we're going to behead him, right? Goes against everything morally and religiously, and now it's tying in politically. So verse 11, so John's beheaded, his head is brought in on a platter and given to the girl Salome, who carried it to her mother, Herodias. This is the last of the prophets, right? We saw Malachi in the Old Testament, but then we come to John the Baptist, and now John is the next in line of the prophets, and he is killed. He suffers a martyr's death here. John's disciples, verse 12, came and took John's body and buried it, which puts them under risk of guilt by association, when they come to Herod's palace to retrieve John's headless body. But Jewish custom was he had to be buried. So they come, they take the body, they bury John, and then they go and they tell Jesus what's happening. So why does Matthew note all of this? And that Jesus heard about John's death unites John with Jesus against this common political enemy. And what it also does, though, by John's disciples going to tell Jesus, it's an indication, it's a suggestion, really, that these disciples still had very high regard for Jesus. And it's interesting, Herod heard about the news of Jesus, verse 1. Now, Jesus is hearing about the news of John. And so Herod, by rejecting the forerunner, John the Baptist, the one who prepared the way, by rejecting him, Herod is also now rejecting the king who followed, John. So the Pharisees reject Jesus, the scribes reject Jesus. Now Herod, by killing John, is rejecting Jesus. And so Jesus is now going to withdraw, verse 13, and he's going to withdraw to Bethsaida. So he's experienced this strong rejection from the common people to the nation's religious leaders, to the political leaders. Everyone is opposing him, so now he withdraws. Why is he withdrawing? So that he can train his disciples. In view of all this conflict, they no doubt needed some strengthening of their faith in him. And so Jesus is going to do that. He's going to cultivate their faith by performing these two miracles. The first is Jesus' feeding of the 5,000. This is a miracle all four gospel accounts record. And what it does is it stresses Jesus' power to create. It also stresses his compassion, and equally important, it stresses the responsibility of the disciples to minister to the multitudes as representatives of Jesus. This is also a foreshadowing of the coming kingdom banquet when Jesus returns. So this is a simple meal that Jesus is going to use to perform this miracle. This simple meal contrasts starkly with Herod's big festival birthday feast celebration that we just saw. So let's look at verse 13 and this first miracle. When Jesus heard what happened, that being John being beheaded, he withdrew by boat privately to a solitary place. When he heard about John's death, he withdrew from Herod's territory, right? From his precinct. He also withdrew from Herod's animosity. So he left the area, the jurisdiction of Herod. Why? Because he probably believes at this point that Herod is going to oppose him as well, just as he opposed John. So he leaves. He withdraws from this place, not because he's afraid. It's just not yet his time, and this confrontation would be unnecessary. He's wanting to teach his disciples. So he withdraws to a solitary place, a secluded place. This place would have been near Bethsaida on the northeast shore of Galilee. How do we know that? Luke chapter 9. So hearing that Jesus is withdrawing, the crowds follow him. But he's out on a boat sailing to the other side of Galilee, so they have to go around by foot. So they follow him on foot from all the towns. There would have been several towns around this area. So Jesus, he's trying to travel to a secluded place across the Sea of Galilee on a boat, and all these throngs of people are racing around on foot to beat him there. They had to have learned where he was going, so they knew this. So they're walking along the coastline of Galilee from the western side all the way up to the northeastern side. And when Jesus got to Bethsaida, he sees this crowd is already there. He's trying to withdraw from the crowds. So he leaves, he gets to where he's wanting to go, and he sees the crowds are there before him. So what does he do? How does he respond? He has compassion on them. And so he heals their sick. That's what I had mentioned, this miracle. Part of it is to show Jesus' compassion. Part of it also is to show his ability to create. But this is a theme in Matthew, showing the compassion of the king. Verse 15. So they're out there most of the day. As evening approached, the disciples came to Jesus and said, "This is a remote place. It's getting late, so get rid of the crowds so they can go to the villages and buy their own food," right? So based on the context, the word evening, as evening approached, this would have meant late afternoon. Now again, there's several small towns within walking distance of where they were in Bethsaida. So the people could have gone anywhere and purchased their own meals for the day, right? So the disciples, they tell Jesus, tell them just to go, right? Go find your meals. But Jesus replied, they don't need to go away. You feed them. You feed them, give them something to eat. He's turning the attention of the disciples towards their own resources. And by urging them to consider their own resources, what Jesus is doing is he's leading the disciples to recognize their own personal inadequacy. They don't have the means to do this, right? Jesus knows they don't have the means themselves to feed these people. So what he wants them to do is teach them that they are inadequate, but they can turn to him as an adequate resource. You feed them. Verse 17, we can't. We only have 5 loaves of bread, and we only have 2 fish. Now, there's nothing in the context that really suggests that those numbers 5 and 2 have any significant meaning. This is just the situation. They had 5 loaves of bread, 2 fish, right? This is all we have. Jesus says, verse 18, bring them here. Bring them to me. And then he directs this multitude of people to sit down in the grass. He takes the 5 loaves. He takes the 2 fish. He looks up to heaven. He gives thanks, and he breaks the loaves. This act of looking to heaven and thanking God and breaking the bread, this was a normal activity for any head of household in the time. This is what you did before the meal. So Jesus here acting as the head of the household. So he takes the 5 loaves of bread, the fish, he looks up to heaven, he offers them up, he gives thanks, takes the bread and breaks it, and he gives it to the disciples, and then the disciples give this bread to the people. Jesus performs this miracle. He's going to create, right? Part of the reason of this miracle is to show compassion, which he just did. We saw that. Now it's to show his ability to provide, to create. He's going to feed this crowd with this 5 loaves of bread and 2 fish. And they all ate, verse 20, and they were satisfied. Everyone had enough to eat, and they were satisfied. And the disciples picked up 12 basketfuls of broken bread that was left over. This provision did not just supply, it was so abundant. There were 12 large baskets full of scraps left over. Even after many thousands of people had eaten all that they wanted, they were satisfied. There's still 12 baskets left. Now, 12 baskets, evidently each disciple had their own basket and was circulating these baskets among the crowd, collecting all the leftovers until each basket was full. And the number of those, verse 21, who ate was about 5,000 men, besides women and children. So with 5,000 men, the total size of this crowd easily would have been 10 to 20,000 people. Why only the men? That's an Old Testament precedent to just count the number of men. This miracle was important to three particular groups: the disciples, the followers who believed, and the unbelievers who were watching all this happen with great awe. And that miracle marks a turning point, because from now on, from here out in Matthew's gospel, the miracles are primarily for the benefit of just the disciples, in the sense that they are designed to instruct the disciples. They also confirm the faith of the believers, and they test the unbelief of the unbelievers. But from here on out, the miracles are primarily to teach the disciples. This miracle, the significance of this miracle, was primarily for the disciples. What Jesus is doing is he's illustrating the kind of ministry that they are going to be involved in when he ascends to heaven, when he departs, right? They were going to be charged with feeding the people, not just with physical food, but with spiritual food. And the source of that nourishment would only come from the Lord himself. And when that supply of spiritual food ran out, just like with the bread and the fish here in this miracle, they would need to turn back to Christ for more. He would supply them, but the feeding would be done through the disciples. This is his charge in the Great Commission. This is our charge as disciples today. The traditional belief of the Jews of this day was that when Messiah came, he would feed the people with bread from heaven, just like Moses did with the manna from heaven. So this is, it's all ringing in the ears of these people of the time, the Jews of the time, believer and unbeliever. But this is really meant to teach the disciples that when I send you out, that the provision comes from me. You pray to me to provide. I will provide, but it will come through you, just as you are feeding this multitude. So that's the first miracle. And then we come to this miracle of Jesus walking on the water. And again, this is meant to deepen the faith of the disciples. So immediately, verse 22, immediately Jesus made the disciples get into the boat that he just sailed across on, go ahead of him back to the other side, and he would stay and dismiss the crowd. So as soon as the people finished eating, Jesus, the word here is compelled, right? Made the disciples. He compelled them to get into the boat and depart back for the other side of the lake. There's a few reasons for Jesus doing this. You go and I'll dismiss the crowd. One is this miracle would have refueled some of the enthusiasm of this crowd to draft Jesus back into their fold as this conquering Messiah, right? They wanted to conquer. He wasn't quite doing this like they wanted, so they rejected him. But hey, he just performed this miracle. Let's try again. Let's try to draft him in. And so perhaps here Jesus sends the disciples away so they aren't part of this temptation by this crowd. But also he wants to get away to pray. And we'll see that in verse 23. And he wants to get some rest. And when we get to Mark's gospel of account of this miracle, Mark 6, we'll see that. He wants to get away. That's his whole reason for leaving in the first place. He wants to pray. He wants to rest. And then he wants to teach his disciples another lesson here. So he sends them back up the coast of the Sea of Galilee, back towards Bethsaida, and orders them, wait for me there. I'm going to come by foot. First, I'm going to dismiss these crowds. So they listen, they get in the boat, and they head across the sea. Now, what they really needed to do was follow the coastline of this lake, the Sea of Galilee. What's going to happen to them is they're going to end up way off course because of the storm, but that was the whole point. Just get in the boat, head back towards Bethsaida. I'll meet you there. Verse 23, after he dismissed the disciples, he went up the mountainside by himself to pray. And later that night, he was finally there alone. Now, these weren't real mountains. This is just a hilly area. So he goes up a hillside and he prays, right? And it's finally late. It's dark. It's quiet. So Jesus is resting there. He's probably staying there much longer than the disciples thought he was going to be there. This word evening covers a very big period of time from late afternoon till late after sunset. So here it really is late in the evening, and we're going to see this. Next verse. So the boat is already a considerable distance from land. Now why? All they had to do was sail up the coastline. But now they're way out in the middle. Why? Because the wind and the waves were battering this boat and pushing them way off course. So they're a long way from shore, and they're really a long way from where they were supposed to go in Bethsaida, because this storm kicked up on the Sea of Galilee, which is not unusual. Just by the way this land is arranged, these storms can kick up out of nowhere at any time. This storm forces them off course, away from their destination, right? It impedes their progress. Very important. Verse 25, shortly before dawn. Now, in some translations, this is read as the fourth watch of the night, and we'll talk about that. Jesus went out to them. Remember, they're way out in the middle of the Sea of Galilee. So Jesus goes to them. How? He walks on the water. He walks on the storm. He walks on the very thing that is pushing them off course. Now, this fourth watch, the Jews divided the night into 3 watches, from sunset to sunrise. The Romans divided the night into 4 watches. So Matthew's using this division of watches under Roman tradition, 4 watches. So the fourth watch of the night would have been the last watch, between 3 a.m. and 6 a.m. So Jesus stays behind to pray. So he's there most of the night. He's praying, he's resting. While he's doing that, the disciples are fighting the storm. They're rowing, trying to get back to shore. It's interesting in Genesis 1:28, before the fall of man, God ordered Adam to have dominion over the land, over the sea, over creation. Here, Jesus is doing precisely that. He's fulfilling the purpose God had for Adam, which gives testimony to Jesus being the second Adam. Where Adam had failed, Jesus succeeds. He has dominion over the seas. Between 3 and 6 in the morning, they're exhausted. He's rested. They're fighting the storm. He comes out to them walking on the water. When the disciples, verse 26, see him walking on the lake, they're terrified. It's a ghost. And they cried out in fear. Now, the word here in Greek for ghost is phantasma. phantom, right? It means ghost, but really what it means is an apparition. It's some type of a optical illusion. It's a distortion of a appearance. So the disciples see Jesus coming, but to them, his image is distorted. It resembles a ghost. Now, that could be for any number of reasons: the rain, the fog, the storm, the lighting is very poor. There was popular superstition in this time that evil spirits lived in the Sea of Galilee, and that anyone who had drowned there before haunted the sea. So this really was some type of a ghost. But they see him walking towards them. Verse 27, and they are afraid. But Jesus says to them, "Take courage, it is I." It is I is a play on words of I am. It's what God spoke to Moses, I am. It's what Jesus spoke to the Pharisees when they challenged him at his arrest. Are you the Son of the living God? I am, right? Don't be afraid, I am. This is a claim on who he is. He is God, right? Now, the disciples may not have realized this claim in this moment of terror, but later they're going to see the significance in these words, particularly at his resurrection. Peter, as Peter does, says to Jesus, "Lord, if it is you, tell me to come walking to you on the water." This is the first of 3 occasions in Matthew's gospel that we see Peter receiving some type of special treatment. We see it here. We'll see it in chapter 16 and chapter 17. This seems almost incredible that Peter believes he can walk on the water, but the disciples had already performed miracles before because Jesus gave them the power, the authority to do so. So Peter's asking, "Lord, if this is you, command me to come." He's wanting to be close to Jesus. And this is a theme with Peter throughout the Gospels. So Jesus replies, verse 29, "Come." And so Peter gets down out of the boat, walks on the water, and came towards Jesus. This remarkable trust that Peter had to climb over the side of a boat in a storm and begin walking on the water towards Jesus. What he's doing here in his faith is he's fulfilling God's command for man to have dominion over the sea. It's what Jesus is doing here. And in this moment of faith and trust, Peter exhibits the same thing. But, verse 30, as soon as he looked away and he saw the storm, then he became afraid and he began to sink. And he cried out, "Lord, save me." He's doing good. He's doing well until he becomes more concerned about the storm than about Jesus. Seeing the wind, when he saw the wind, that's a figure of speech for seeing the storm. He's focusing on the distressing circumstances, and that distracts his attention away from Jesus, and it weakens his faith. And now he begins to sink. Verse 31, immediately Jesus reached out his hand, caught him. "You of little faith, why did you doubt?" It's interesting here. Jesus is rebuking Peter for his weak faith, his little faith, even though he was the one that stepped out of the boat, meaning his faith was stronger than that of the disciples who remained in the boat. But Jesus uses this opportunity to rebuke Peter so that Peter can see that this constant confidence in Christ is what is needed. And that would have been a lesson to the other disciples in the boat as well. So Peter here becomes a good example, and at the same time he becomes a bad example. Verse 32. So he picks up Peter. They get into the boat. As soon as they climb into the boat, the wind dies down, and then those who were in the boat, the disciples, worshipped. They worshiped Jesus, saying, "Truly you are the Son of God." So this calming of the storm, that's not the climax of this story. They're worshiping Jesus. That's the climax of the story. This is the first time that they address Jesus with this title, Son of God. This is a new high in the life of the disciples in regards to their appreciation for who Jesus is. Remember back in chapter 8, verse 27 with the storm, and they make a comment, who is this man that even the wind and the sea obey him? Now they know. Now they know I am, right? And they worship him right there. Now, they're going to have lapses later on. We're going to see this. But in spite of those lapses, they still understand this title of Messiah related to Jesus. It's not a mature understanding, but it's getting there. So those are these two miracles. And then we come to this short section. And this is public ministry in Gennesaret. So this very short section, it summarizes Jesus' public ministry at this point in his ministry. And it shows that even though Jesus is withdrawing from the unbelievers and giving special attention to training his disciples, he still has time to minister to those who are in need. So verse 34, when they cross over, because that's what they were doing, they landed at Gennesaret. Gennesaret was the name of both a plain on the northwest coast of the Sea of Galilee. It is also the name of a village on the plain. So this would be like New York, right? The village Gennesaret on the plain of Gennesaret. They travel from northeast to northwest side of Galilee. When the men of that place recognize Jesus, they send word to all the surrounding countryside, and everybody flocks, bringing their sick to him. Soon as Jesus gets out of the boat, he's recognized. And now all types of needy people are coming to him for healing. Verse 36, and they beg Jesus to just let the sick touch the edge of his cloak, that they would be healed. And this is a callback to chapter 9 with the woman who was hemorrhaging, just touching the border of Jesus' cloak and being healed. So now everybody's pressing in on him with this thought, if we could just touch his cloak, we'll be healed. That faith is huge, which contrasts with what Jesus rebukes Peter for of your little faith. So again, this is an object lesson. It's a teaching moment for the disciples. And these few verses here, they do a few things. They show the continuing broad appeal of Jesus' ministry, right? All these people are coming in. It shows that Jesus continues to minister to the multitudes, even though he's trying to focus on the disciples. And it shows that Jesus has no concern with becoming ritually unclean. He's coming into contact with unclean people, which would have made him unclean. But he's not worried about that. Rather than worrying about becoming unclean himself, he is healing and making other people clean. And that instance right there is going to set the stage for the confrontation over what is clean and what is unclean that we're going to see in the next section of Matthew, which will be in chapter 15 tomorrow. But that is Matthew chapter 14, and I pray that that has been a help to you, and I appreciate you being here. Again, tomorrow we will look at chapter 15, and we're going to see this confrontation ramp up again, and this time over what is clean and what is unclean. But thank you for being here this evening. I pray that you have a wonderful rest of your evening. Stay safe and stay healthy, and I look forward to seeing you soon. Till then, take care, and God bless. Bye-bye.